All right. Good morning, everyone. Hello. Thank you all for getting here and getting settled in your seats. I just wanted to welcome everyone to this very, very special event. To the students and the adults in attendance, today is a special day, and you're going to get the privilege to hear Mr. Greenfield's story, and I know that you'll give him your undivided attention, and you will recognize what a true privilege this is that many people do not get to experience. So today we're going to start off with Rabbi Karen Citrin, who is with us today from Temple Beth David. Then after Rabbi Karen speaks for a few minutes, students Kabir Levgin and Skylar McCaskill are going to come up, and they're going to give us a little introduction to Mr. Greenfield. And then finally we'll hear from Mr. Greenfield, and we'll hear his story. So please join me in welcoming Rabbi Karen.
Good morning. It is an honor to be here with all of you. I'm so grateful to Thurston Middle School and the teachers for organizing this important experience. I want to try to personalize what you're going to hear today just a little bit. When I was growing up, not too far up the road in Belmont, I knew that there was something very special about my great uncle Harry. It wasn't just his thick Polish accent that was hard for me to understand. He was different mainly because he did not talk about his past, not in the way my other relatives did, who thrived on telling stories over and over again to anyone who would listen. Perhaps you have grandparents like that. My Uncle Harry had survived the Lodz ghetto and several concentration camps, including Auschwitz-Birkenau. The numbers that were tattooed on his arm will be forever engraved in my mind. 141421. Harry did not start sharing his story until around the time I was in high school. At that time, as Holocaust survivors were aging, there was a push to record their stories so that they could bear witness to this terrible chapter in human history, this time of devastating and nearly incomprehensible destruction and loss of life, a time when humanity failed. His experience influenced why I decided to become a rabbi, both to help ensure the continuity of the Jewish people and to use my people's history of being subject to discrimination and hate to make sure that no one else is treated as different or other. Because we all know that this is how hatred starts. Attitudes and words, then actions, bullying, systemic discrimination, and violence. I am impressed to learn that you have all studied and know how the pyramid of hate works. And it does work. The pyramid of hate demonstrates that the hatred embedded in all genocides is built upon the acceptance of behaviors in the lower levels of the pyramid. Which is why we are here today, because I believe we are all obligated to stop hatred before it even gets to level 1, including and especially 13 and 14-year-olds. I want to share that Jewish tradition actually recognizes age 13 as the start of adulthood and celebrates this time through the bar and bat mitzvah ceremony. Maybe some of you have been to your friend's bar and bat mitzvah, and I know some of you have become bar and bat mitzvah yourselves because I was there with you. In other words, your age right now is the time, the prime time, to develop your identity, your thoughts, and your actions. What you say and do matters, regardless of religion, race, ethnicity, and gender. Our differences are amazing and beautiful, and there is so much more that binds us together as human beings. We cannot be silent in the face of intolerance or indifference. There is a Jewish saying that is 2,000 years old, In a place where there are no humans, strive to be human. This is why we are here now, to listen to Aron Greenfield's story and to become witnesses to his survival, his humanity, and his sacred life. I challenge each of us to imagine what it would be like if we were in Mr. Greenfield's shoes, if what happened to him happened to us and our families. My great uncle died several years ago. I know that Aron may be one of the last Holocaust survivors we are all privileged to hear in person. So thank you, Mr. Greenfield, for sharing your story with us today. I know it is not easy. It will be our honor, our obligation to continue to share your story for years to come.
I'd like to invite Kabir and Skylar to come on up.
I would like to welcome Mr. Aron Greenfield, who is 95 and a Holocaust survivor from Poland. This is a unique opportunity to hear directly from a Holocaust survivor, of which there are very few left to tell their story to us in real time. He is here today to share his experiences of hatred towards Jews that first started as propaganda from the German Nazis and share his survival of the Holocaust. He originally was the 5th oldest from a large family of 9 children. Prior to the invasion of Poland by the German Nazis, Mr. Aron Greenfield and his siblings attended school, and his father worked selling garment materials door to door to be tailored eventually. Back then, it was considered upscale to have your clothing made by a tailor, and only the poor would go to a store to buy their clothing. His mother stayed home to raise their large family and help his younger siblings who were too young to go to school.
Mr. Aron Greenfield was 12 when the propaganda and hatred towards Jews intensified. He was 14 years old when he was forced out of his home and moved to a ghetto. Most of us here today are 13 or 14 years old. When he was 15, he was sent to a concentration camp. By great contrast, when all of us are 15, we will be in high school. Aron did not go to high school. Instead, he went to 9 different concentration camps. To assist Mr. Greenfield with questions, we have Mrs. McCaskill here today. Please give a warm welcome to Mr. Greenfield.
Hello everyone, thank you for joining us today to hear Aron Greenfield's testimony of his experience as a Holocaust survivor. We will start today with Aron reading his testimony about his life before the Nazis took over Poland and his experience as a Holocaust survivor. After he reads his testimony, I will ask Aron questions to prompt him to share more experiences when he was 13 and 14, right before the Nazis took over Poland, to when he was in concentration camps during the age of 15 and up to 19 years of age. At the very end, we will open it up to questions from all of you, the 8th grade class.
Hello? Can everybody hear me pretty well? I am always criticized that I don't speak loud enough, but I'll try my best, okay? My name is Aron Greenfield. I grew up in a small Polish town called Strakowa. I was one of 9 children from a deeply religious Jewish family. At 3 years old, I was learning from a rabbi in a small basement room, like other very religious Orthodox Jews. I wore a yarmulke, which is a headpiece, and long sideburns, When I got older, I was sent to public school. There were only 7 Jewish kids in a class of 65 students, which were mostly Catholic. The majority of my small town was not Jewish. Every day I ran home to escape attacks from anti-Jewish bullies. In July of 1939, I became bar mitzvah. I suppose you all know what that means. From that day on, I was responsible for my own deeds. In Jewish tradition, this meant I was become a man. However, on September 1, 1939, my childhood and our lives truly ended 2 months later when the German army rode into Poland. One day, the whole town was told to gather and to see a hanging of my friend Aron Diamond. He was asked if he had any last words. I heard him say, the Shema. I don't know if anybody would know what Shema is. The Shema means, is in our prayer, it says, "O hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one." Then he was dead. I know, he was hung because he illegally purchased coals from a Polish man who was also hung. They also hung 20 Catholic Polish men because they helped the Jews. By winter, it had become difficult to get basic provisions. We needed milk for my little sister and little brothers. My family was desperate. My little sister was 3 years old, and my other younger siblings were under 12 years old. Even though we knew it was illegal, early in the morning it was cold and snowy, and I went with my 2 older brothers, to purchase milk from a Polish farmer. We knew it was actually very dangerous because we were not allowed to go out without an armband, or only 2 hours a day, as written here. But I committed a crime going out to look for milk. On the way back, we were caught we went to a farm to buy milk. We knew the woman. On the way back, we were caught by the German police, the Nazis, who brutally beat my 2 brothers. They made me watch. This is not written here, but I just remember my 2 brothers were beaten, and they made me watch, and they hit them with a whip that he used for a lion. After that, they were home for about a week just to heal from the pain. My older brother and I were regularly being taken from our home after midnight to put to work shoveling snow and repairing roads for the German army. Shortly after, they were sent to work camps, concentration camps. My brothers were. I remained with my mother, 3 sisters, and 2 younger brothers. 6 or 7 months later, in the spring, the Germans ordered all Jews that had 2 hours to gather whatever they could carry and move to the newly created Jewish ghetto. I'm just going to tell you what it means very simply. They told us to put all the furniture outside. Anybody that's not Jewish could take it for free. And we just only carried whatever we could, walked 3 kilometers to a place, and they stuck us into it. To give you an example, let's say if you think of your own dining room, in that dining room, we were 9 children, a mother and father, and 2 more families. We slept on the floor, on the table, like with no covering or nothing. It's just the beginning, the first few days, the first few weeks. Before leaving, we were ordered to move our furniture outside so our non-Jewish neighbors could take whatever they wanted to. In the ghetto, we were squeezed into a tiny room that we shared with 3 other families. We took turns sleeping on the floor, on the table, and nobody cared because we were starving. All I could think about was my next piece of bread. And by the way, the bread was like a piece of lime. It was the worst ever. Half-baked, didn't matter. I was assigned to work in a bakery, and one day a kind Polish woman let me steal some bread. Polish woman, which means she knew she was not Jewish, but she knew me, and she says, take some bread, and I put it on my stomach and with my belt, and I covered it up and took a chance to smuggle it in on the way home so I can give it to my family so they wouldn't starve. This is not written here, but I just remember. I think this saved my life because soon after the Germans announced a selection, my mother told me to wear adult. Where did we just get that? I ate the whole bread. Did I say that already? Yeah. I ate the whole loaf. I think this saved my life because soon after that the Germans announced a selection. A selection meant to left and to the right. The people on the right have a right to live and go to concentration camp, and the people on the left went to Auschwitz to be disposed of and killed and burned or whatever. You know about Auschwitz, I'm sure. My mother told me to wear adult clothing. My mother told me that when we were in line to be checked which one is good for work, they lined us up and looked at us like a horse. They looked at me, and my mother said to me, put on long pants, and tell him you're 16. I was only 15. Yeah, 15. We stood in line, and it was directed to the side, and it was directed to the side. My mother was sent to the others with younger siblings. There was a selection. The young people that could walk stayed on one side, and the others stayed on the other side. They never told you what they did, what they will do, but my mother, all my youngest brothers and sisters. But they made that selection. I'll never forget watching my 4-year-old sister, Rivka, thrown into a truck like a piece of garbage. I never saw them again. I was sent first to my first camp, a fertilizer factory. A fertilizer factory was like dirty dust. I don't know if you know what it is. Because I was not a regular worker, just a Jew. No gloves or a mask like everybody else that worked over there, which were Germans, and they got paid very well. We just did the dust and everything else. The place was so taxing. Some of the weaker among us died because they didn't give us a mask. So when he came back to the barracks to sleep that night, and within 2 hours he got completely swollen, and 5 hours later he died. I was lucky to survive it. Over the next 4 years, I was sent to 8 other camps. We were starved, beaten, and literally worked to death. Going from one camp to another, it was not a good thing, because every time you went there, you didn't know who to trust, who's going to steal your bread. There were times I took my bread and tied it to my leg in the middle of the night so nobody would steal it. I saw the day of 1944, I saw American bombers overhead. I hoped that they would bomb the Germans' anti-aircraft guns that were kept next to our camp. Then we would all die and forget about it. It would be a good thing, because we wanted to die. It's just that kind of living was unbelievable. Only the thought that my parents might still be alive kept me from suicide. The last of my 9 concentration camp was called Görlitz. And that morning, they would take us to long marches to work sites. Sometimes they would keep us overnight, and we would spend the night in a barn. We lay on the ground without blankets and used one another's stomach as a pillow because it was so crowded. One day I woke up and found the guy under my head had died. Sadly, the first thing I did was taking his shoes. How awful, isn't it? I knew that I was also dying, so I decided to bring myself to the infirmary and say that I'm not capable of work anymore and don't kill me. But it's not written here, but I'm just adding it. Either I would be shot or allowed to gain my strength to work another day. I used the opportunity to sneak into a kitchen near the infirmary and steal potatoes and soup, which I traded for bread. And the reason I did it is because the bread I can hide for another day. The soup, I have no place to hide it, and somebody will steal it from me. This saved my life, because with the Russian front moving closer, the Nazis sent us on a death march of 6,000 who were left in Camp Görlitz. 2,000 died. We were finally liberated on the last day of March of the war, May 8, 1945. The war ended for Auschwitz in January, and we were still suffering. This is not written here, but between that day, most of my camp were killed and died of starvation. After a year and after I survived we were finally liberated on the last day, I don't know if I repeated it, last day of my war, May 8, 1945, the last day of the war. The person in my immediate family who also survived was my sister. After years in Poland, in our hometown, we made it to a displaced person, what they call the DP camp in Austria, and which was, to us this was paradise. We got 3 meals a day, and I had a bed to sleep on. It was actually straw, but it was pretty good. 3 years later, I came to America and started a new life in Boston. different odd jobs, and eventually opened a retail business, which I still go every day. In 1931, my wife Martha and I married. We made one daughter. We have one daughter and 3 wonderful grandchildren. America gave me a family, a future, and my freedom. I know by God, my good fortune, and I am grateful. This has been a journey of freedom. I am a Holocaust survivor. I am a witness to the Holocaust and the horrible crimes against Jewish people. Now that you have heard my story, you too are a witness to the Holocaust.
Thank you, Aron. I'm going to ask you a few questions. I'm going to share some information. I've had the great honor of meeting with him over the past few months and learning these incredible stories. And hopefully we can, with our questions and answers, share this. So you had shared that you had a hard time in 6th grade, that you couldn't focus on your studies because of the propaganda and hatred towards Jews. And your teachers felt that you could do a better job, and they held you back. They made you repeat 6th grade. Before Hitler marched in, what did the posters say about Jews? What did the posters say about Jews?
First of all, the posters started, I have to tell you that sometimes propaganda is just like a bullet. The posters started even before Hitler marched into Poland, and I want to tell you this because when you are invaded, the problem is with some people, they make sure that you will kill you, because they want to make sure they make problems for everybody, and that's what exactly happened. The propaganda was all over the walls, done by the Polish Christians. And also, it's a shame that this is something I'm thinking about, that in this country, every time so many people killed, that it wasn't being reminded in the churches that this is going on. So I felt when I came to this country, I hardly finished 6th grade because of anti-Semitism in a way, because my teacher gave me what they call, was forced, number 4. I mean, the worst thing that you get when you get your diploma. Yeah, when she gave me the worst thing, she says, because she knew I was smart, but I was. She failed me, yeah. But she was right, she was very honest. She said to my mother, very simply, the man is very smart, but he doesn't want to do it. So that's why I gave him, because she complained. He's very smart, he's the best in the Jewish school. How come he's doing? Because I went to a school where the majority of the kids were Christian, Catholic in Poland, and there were only 7 Jewish kids. I had to run for my life because of the propaganda that was going on against Jews. And propaganda is like a bullet. It's the same thing. Any questions?
I have a few more questions. At that time, food was scarce in Poland. You had a large family of 11 at home, hungry, and food was rationed. They gave you a card to show your ration of food that you could get. Jewish families were given a different ration of food from other Polish families.
The rations for Jews were half the amount. In other words, if you're Polish and you were allowed to buy butter, let's say, you were allowed only 1 decagram or 2 decagram or an ounce, okay? Where the other people, because it was wartime, they got twice as much. And so starvation was so bad already, and before you know, they told us to put all the furniture, this isn't written here, or didn't I write it, all the furniture outside. Yeah, outside for anybody to take that's not Jewish and take it for free. And we walked 3 kilometers, which is about 1.5 miles or whatever, 2 miles, and to a place a barn and some barracks that they emptied, that Polish people lived. They're like little houses, but the problem was that in a little 3-room house, a 3-room apartment, they stuck in my family, which is 9 children and mother and father, and 2 more families. We slept on a table, we slept on the floor, we slept anywhere we could. I always found a way, even when we were in that ghetto. I got a job in a bakery. I said, couldn't be any better. And on the way back, I'm so sorry, but I stole the bread and he took it home. And I got away with it. I put it on my belt, and the woman, the guy that was checking us out, he knew what I was doing, but he was Polish, but he was not Jewish, and he was nice about it. He says, if they catch you, it won't be my fault. I said, go ahead. I didn't see anything, and I stole the bread. Does that make sense to you? I guess not.
Before you went to the ghetto, you were very hungry, the family was hungry, so you snuck out after curfew to try to trade some fabric for money to buy bread at the market by the church. You were careful to roll down your Star of David armband so no one could see it and identify you as Jewish. You were 14 and a former classmate pointed out to the police and told them you were Jewish and out after curfew. So this was down by the church. What happened that day at the market, down by the church? What did the police do?
Yeah, I just want to show you how, the Germans were our enemies, and a Polish guy, being, anti-Jewish or whatever you want to call it, or maybe just plain stupid, told the German that because I had blonde hair when I was younger, I didn't wear a hat or anything. I smuggled through many times as a non-Jew. I spoke Polish 100% and Jewish and German too. I speak a few languages anyway, so. And he went to school with me. It's interesting because they helped the enemy. The anti-Semitism, the stupidity of the thing. He helped the Germans, and he told them I was Jewish, and they took me to the police station. My parents didn't know for 3 days what happened to me because they couldn't care less. There were no phones, anything like that. And I slept in a basement, a cellar with coals, and I slept on the coals there during the day. I had to shovel the snow, the coals into the oven over there, whatever, me and another kid. And this is because the kid that told the Germans that I was Jewish, because I hit my armband with a Jewish star on it, because I hid it. I rolled up my sleeve to cover it so nobody know, so I could be like everybody else, but no Jewish. And this kid went to school with me, helping the Germans, told him, he's a Jew. The Germans caught me. I was missing. They took me to the police station. They didn't beat me, but I worked in a basement in a cellar, shoveling snow with another kid that was caught. And my parents didn't know for a long time if I'm dead or alive. And I'm going to go, this is 1939. In 1945, I'm going to say that when I was liberated and I came to the train station to get up in my town, that Polish kids, or Polish Catholic, let's say, was there at the station. And I says, and by that time I was already free, as they say. I had a guitar in my hand, which the places were open, so you took whatever you wanted. The Germans escaped. So I don't play guitar, I didn't know what to do with it. I figured maybe I'd sell it for something.
And this was after you were in 9 concentration camps?
Yeah, this was after the 9 concentration camps, where I was already free. And the kid that told the police that I was Jewish was at the police station, and he said to me, oh my God, you goddamn Jew, you're still alive. Very plain and simple. I took that guitar that I had in my hand, hit him right over the head. He was so shocked that I would dare do this, and he just walked away. And this was my thing. And in Poland, many of the Polish people helped the Germans. Many of them were very good and helped the Jews too. Many of them hid Jews too. I don't want to be, saying that this is a one way. But there were some idiots that did that. So Germany took advantage of it and told them, be a squealer and we give you some money, whatever.
Before you went off to the ghetto, you snuck off to have your bar mitzvah. And at that time, and at that time, no one was going to temple before the Germans marched in. And
before the Germans marched in, this was like July. I was born in July 17, 1926. A few days before you guys. Anyway, so I was supposed to be bar mitzvah. I was all prepared. The rabbi was supposed to listen to it, but the temple was already, windows were broken, not by the Germans, but just by the dumb people that tried to say, hey, we have it made. Let's break the windows of the temple, the Jewish temple. And so I had a bar mitzvah over there in that temple. What else did I say? I'm sorry. Oh yeah, that's right. I'm glad she's here, because I sometimes, being my age, I repeat myself sometimes, so you forgive me. I had the bar mitzvah that I had, which is a big deal here, and in a temple where the rabbi showed up, and 2 Jewish people were supposed to be 10 to listen to it, and I told my speech at the bar mitzvah speech, and he said, let's get out of here. This was before the war, before Hitler marched in. Some of the Polish people hating so much the Russians, whatever. Anyway, the point is, they don't want anybody. They just wanted the Jews. So if you were ignorant enough and came from a home where anyway, the point is, we be careful with some of the Polish people, but some of the Polish people helped too. Some of them, there was actually a Polish woman next to us living. She happened to be of German descent because we lived about 20 kilometers from the German border, and she helped us brought us milk for the baby because Regina she was about 2 years old at the time, and so on.
In the concentration camps, I wondered what you slept on. What was it that you slept on when you were at the concentration camps?
I slept on a bunk bed, actually up, and there was no mattress. It was just straw in a bag of people use for potato bag or something like that, straw, and that's what I slept on.
And food was very scarce in the concentration camps. They gave you, well, barely any food.
About the food. Well, she said food was very scarce. In a joke, they always say, there's food, there's no food. There's no food, period. I mean, you only got rations. You were allowed, like, I don't know, a quarter of a pound of bread a day and one slice of butter in certain times. It was just plain starvation. And by that time, 6 months later, I was still home because I was kind of young yet. They took my brothers to concentration camps already. What they called not concentration camp, but it was a concentration camp, except that you were allowed to write a letter every once a month, and the letter was censored. I had them at home, that everything is fine, we're having a good time. You had to write that way. And in the meantime, I found out that my brothers were beaten in the concentration camp because they did something wrong.
Also, you said in the concentration camps you saw things that were surprising. Tell us about the father and son. What happened?
These are little bits and pieces. There's so much. I was interviewed by the Spielberg. You ever heard of Spielberg? Yeah, well, his people came to my house, interviewed me, and he was there for about 4 hours because there was so much to talk about. And so everything is actually eventually somebody will read it. What was I saying? Sorry. Oh yeah. There's another incident, just to give you an idea about concentration camp. The father and son were in the same concentration camp, just like I was with my brothers. And the father stole the son's bread, and they were actually having a fist fight because of a piece of bread. And the bread was like lime. I mean, you wouldn't want to spit on it. This is what we lived, right? And when I came to this country and people complained, and I remember when I started to understand English, people complained that the soup in the jail that they are in, which she was a criminal, complained that the soup was too cold or too hot and not enough meat. I said to myself, this is a jail. I said, give me that any day, that would be fantastic. You know?
You were moved to a concentration camp. You went to 9 different ones, and you were moved to a concentration camp with your older brothers. And you were working there, but you became very emaciated, and they had to actually move you out to a different one.
In my 5th camp that I was in, I was with my brothers, older brothers, who were all starving together. But one day the Germans decided we're going to take people like myself because I couldn't walk anymore. I was a skeleton, you know. So they said either we're going to shoot him, but the Germans needed every hand because they were starting to lose the war a little bit, you know. So they decided to take the weak people like myself that I cannot walk anymore, but I can still sit and do a job sitting down. So they took people like me so I could. So they separated me from my two brothers, which were older and taller and so forth. And they said, you go into another camp. They never told my brothers where. My brothers, knowing what's going on, they knew they will never see me again because people like me, they usually either shoot you or send you to Auschwitz to be disposed of or something like that. And they never knew what happened to me. And they cried and said goodbye. I never saw them again because they were in a different camp and I was in 6 more camps in the meantime. And after a while, I found out that they were still alive in a camp, which was about 1,700 people in that camp. And when the war ended, I found out, I knew I would get away from it, that they killed most of the people out of revenge. The Germans that were in the war was always almost, it was July, I mean it was the end of the war, the last month of the war. And the Germans took a revenge and they shot most of them in that camp. That includes my 2 brothers. They shot them to that, out of 1,700 people, they shot most of them.
So then you were at another camp and you were very emaciated. So they had moved you on. Your brothers didn't know that you were still alive. They had moved you on and you were at another camp and you had to walk very far to the factory every day. And you knew one day you couldn't walk to the factory. And
Oh yeah, at one camp, this is actually good news in a way. In one camp I decided I'm not going, and I didn't show up to work. You know, in one camp I decided I'm not going to work because I'm so weak, and my barrack that I slept in was not too far from the kitchen. So I went to the doctors, and you had a right to do that, because if you couldn't work, go to the doctor, and the doctor couldn't speak my language. I speak 3 languages, but he was from a Jewish doctor, but he was in trouble too. But he was a doctor, and he spoke only Hungarian, and I don't speak Hungarian. So when I went to the doctors, I took the thermometer. They usually put it under your arm to see how much temperature you have. But I already knew the tricks, so I rubbed the thermometer so it would show that I have 99. What's the worst when you're sick? Yeah, like 100, close to 100. So I could stay in the barracks instead of going to work. I couldn't walk anymore. That was the smartest thing I ever did, because I stayed out, and I found that near the kitchen I could still do, when the kitchen people are sleeping, I could steal potatoes or bread or whatever. It's exactly what I did. And anyway, that was my last camp. And that's when I started to gain weight, and I started to run a business. I used to tell my soup, take my soup, sell it for cigarettes. I don't smoke, but with cigarettes I could buy bread, which some idiot has to have a cigarette. So I bought his bread, and gave him my cigarette. We were getting 10 cigarettes a month, so I saved it, Anyway, so.
so you had great survival instinct, And there was another way that you also survived. You also knew you couldn't walk to the factory, just because if you couldn't make the walk, they would ship you off to Auschwitz or just leave you by the side of the road. And so you went and started sweeping the crazy commander.
I said that the commander of the camp was a German, but he was a criminal from before the war. He killed his own grandmother or something like that. He was crazy, and I knew that this man doesn't know what he's doing. So I didn't show up for the roll call, and they were looking for me. And so the German criminal that was in charge, he said, "What are you doing here? Why aren't you in line over there to go to work?" I said, "You told me to sweep the floor with the ground over here." I did. So he hit me with a whip. "Mach schnell, work faster. Hurry up, you damn Jew," or something like that. And so I stayed there. The next day he saw me again. "No, this is my job." That was the smartest thing I ever did in that camp. And before you know, I got myself a job near the kitchen. And I used to, when the cooks were sleeping, like 11 o'clock before dinner, they got a little nap, because they woke up 4 o'clock in the morning to make breakfast and lunch. I used to go into the kitchen, stuck my hand into the kettle, and steal hot potatoes right out of the hot water, and I started to gain weight. Then I stole more potatoes and started to sell it for some idiots that has to have a cigarette. I said, "Give me a potato, give me your thing, and I'll give you a cigarette, give me your potatoes." You know. So I started to gain weight. That helped my life because I gained weight. So when the death march came, which means every time the Germans were losing, the Russian front was coming forward, they kept us, taking us out. And they were and they pushed the Russian front back, and we had to go back to the camp. And so I started to gain weight and stuff like that.
Can you tell us about your one surviving sister? It was only you and one sister that survived all those concentration camps.
Yeah, my sister was in a concentration camp, and she survived. And when I saw her after the war, I found out she's alive. And I heard stories what happened. In Poland, when you had to go to a dentist and you needed an extra tooth, they gave you made out of silver. And when the Germans saw that, "Come over here," they took all her teeth out because they were silver. The Germans needed for their front. You don't need any silver. And anyway, when I came back, when I found out she's alive, I went to my little town and I found out where she is with other girls hiding, worried about the Russian soldiers, not to be raped and stuff like that. It was awful. And I looked at her, and when I saw her, I was in perfect condition in comparison. Her feet were swollen, bleeding. Her teeth were out completely because she had, what do you call it? When you go to a doctor, you get silver or gold fillings that were worth money. So they took all her teeth out, and she had no teeth. Here she is, 22 years old, and no teeth, and swollen feet, completely, the bloody feet. She never worked a day in her life in this country because she couldn't. Nobody would hire her. She was just a walking skeleton. Anyway.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for sharing all of that. Thank you for sharing all of that. So I wanted to turn it over to the students. Is there a teacher that wants to handle it?
Okay, so folks, I know you prepared some questions and advisory. If you have one that you're wondering about, can you guys hear me? There you go. If you have one that you're wondering about, or maybe one that came up while
So sorry, I just want to say it's an honor to speak with you and hear your story. This is Connor here. I'm a local Boy Scout with Troop 3 Westwood. I've been to your store before to get stuff. I wanted to ask you what you believe the purpose of religion is in a modern society, and what role it should serve in a modern culture and modern society.
Oh, yeah. About religion. Well, religion, in my opinion, is a good thing because it teaches you morals and how to behave and how to be good to each other and so forth. But religion sometimes, if the preacher decides to have it his way, he actually helps the enemy in many ways because he has a church or a synagogue, whatever it may be, any gathering, they take advantage of it and do what's good for themselves. That's my opinion.
Hi, my name is Elizabeth. I wanted to
Tell her, tell her what she said.
I wanted to say thank you for being here and sharing your story. And I was wondering what is the happiest thing that happened to you in such a hard time? What was the best thing that gave you hope?
You have to repeat it to me. When? You mean when I became? Well, oh yeah, I'm glad you said that because the only time I felt that there's a chance, they sometimes tell me, we used to say, where's God? And the first thing I remember I said to a friend of mine in camp, what's God? There is no God. See that American plane? That's God. He's going to bomb the hell out of him. Maybe they'll let us go. And every time we actually went out when the war was coming to an end, and we saw the fights between the Germans, the German jet plane, whatever, fighting each other, each other. The Germans against the Russian planes or American planes. We heard Dresden being bombed. That was, I called, a joy, because we saw it coming to an end. Every time we saw the American planes at 12 o'clock, or was it 1 o'clock, we saw always the American planes coming to bomb Dresden, a big city. I said it's coming to an end slowly. And this is when Germans started to kill many of the camp people in camp, like my brothers. They actually killed 1,500 or 1,700 of them because of revenge, because they were losing the war. And so when I found out that my brothers and one guy came from that camp to our camp still, he says, don't look for your brothers, they're dead, because they killed everybody in that camp. I was lucky to get out, and they sent me over here to this camp. So I knew my brothers were not alive.
All right, we have time for one or two.
I don't know if you can hear me with the mask, but
Time to mask off, if I can hear.
first off, I really appreciate you being here and talking with us about this. I think everyone here would think the same. And I was wondering if you ever considered trying to escape the camp or knew anyone who had attempted to escape the camp.
Okay, let me say this to you. Unfortunately, prejudices among religions are a problem for people. You couldn't trust anybody that's not Jewish. You didn't know whether he's going to sell you out for $1. So there was no hope that way. You couldn't, some of the people didn't cooperate, you didn't know who to trust. So you just didn't do it. So say it again. Yeah, he did. Anyway, she just reminded me, my father escaped from a concentration camp, but he wound up, he knew it was always a mistake in a way because it didn't do him much good, because when he came back to the ghetto, where we were still there, because my father and my brothers went to concentrate to so-called camp, not concentration, but it was concentration camp. He escaped. He spoke German very well because he was born in the Austro-Hungary Empire and he was a soldier there. So he escaped and he came back to the ghetto, which was a mistake, but anyway, he came back. So he told us what's going on, but there's no chance for you to survive because you couldn't trust many people. Some people didn't want to take a chance to help a Jew because they themselves could be in trouble. And some of them hid them, some of them did it for money, and some of them did it and took a chance. So there were nice, you find out in times like that, you find out who is actually very nice and who is not. The people that were quiet, you thought they didn't talk to you, you found out they were very nice people. And some people that were very nice on the outside, but then they sold you for a piece of bread. I mean, for $1, never mind a piece of bread. I mean, I'm talking about a non-Jew helping you sometimes. Some of them, like I said, did it because they wanted to help, and some of them did it for money. So they took everything you had and they hit you, and some of them survived that way too, which is okay. All right?
All right, we've got time for one more, so
Hello, my name is Avery, and you've talked about these propaganda, these genocides, having to hide from people who you consider neighbors and friends. Why do you think they did it? Why do you think all of this happened? And if anyone, who do you hold responsible?
Why did people turn? Why did the Polish people turn on the Jewish people?
Like, what was the... I'm just trying to figure out, like, who or what started all of this in the first place. Why did these people turn against their friends, their family, and their neighbors?
So,
Well, not all did. Well, see, the problem is, I'm not a very religious man now because I sometimes don't trust it because some religions are there to fight another religion. And I hate to bring it up, but Jews are suffering sometimes because of the problem when Jesus came to the story with Jesus and that they actually blamed the Jews. Actually, the Germans learned from the Romans. This is how you do. When you go into a country, you find the people that are in trouble. You tell them you're in trouble because of the Jews, or of the Catholics, or whatever. So you find out how things are when troubles arrive. I mean, you think you know your best friend, but in order to really know him very well, unless you survive with him in the jungle and he doesn't steal your bread, he says, half for you and half for me, then you know he's your friend. But if he doesn't do it, then you know he's just trying to make whatever he can, do whatever he can for himself.
I think a story maybe that you could tell that might answer that question also was that there were Polish people that did help that were non-Jewish and they ended up getting hung.
Oh, that's right, yeah. As a matter of fact, well, this, the hanging of, his name was Aron Diamond, okay? And he bought some coals from a non-Jew that stole the coals. There was the first few days of the war, first few months of the war. And he bought that coal from that Polish guy. It was dangerous for anybody to help a Jew too, because if you did, you could wind up with the Germans giving you a hard time, putting you to jail or something. You have to collaborate. So when people say, if you minded your own business, that's fine. If you wanted to help the Germans, because they don't ask for help, that's a shame. But if you are forced to do it, that's another story. You want to survive first, then worry about you later or something. Oh yeah. In the beginning of the war, only about 2 months, or maybe the war started September 1st, this must have been October 15th or something like that. And there was a hanging of 21 people. The 21 people was only one Jew, and the rest of them were all Polish, because they stole some coals to sell or to have for their own, so they wouldn't freeze. That was the beginning of fall and winter and stuff. They called the whole town out to see what to do to people that don't obey the law, to do with people that don't obey the law. And they said, they played music, and they hung 19 or 20 Polish people that stole coal from a train or a standing train, and one Jew that bought some of this thing. And they played music, so they hung those Polish people too. And I remember the Jewish guy read a Jewish prayer before he died, Shema Israel, which is, if you know what it is, anyway, it's, oh my God, and so on and so on. Speaking of God, many of myself and my others, I said, where's God? To us, God was the American plane coming and bombing Germany. That was God. We saw every time at 1 o'clock, it was already 1945, in the beginning of 45. So that was the liberation. I was liberated by the Russians. And people that liberated by the Americans had it right away pretty good. The Russians, they themselves didn't have much. So if I went to an open house that was left by the Germans because they escaped, and took something, a Russian soldier would do the same. Anyway, people always say, being liberated by the Americans was fantastic. They came with cake and coffee, and the Russians themselves suffered too, so you couldn't expect much.
Thank you so much. Can we just do one last thank you for the privilege of getting you here tonight? here. And I know it was a powerful learning experience for all of our students and as well as the adults in the room. So really thank you so much for your time. And we just have a small kind of token appreciation for both Ms. McCaskill, Mr. Greenfield, and Rabbi Karen, just on behalf of all of us for their time and the effort they put into this. So again, one more time, thank you. And we're going to dismiss by team, so just kind of keep an ear out. Let's do blue team first. Stay with your advisories as